Hey guys, it's Miss Dearman here. I'm just interrupting this episode with a quick ad break. Just to let you guys know, we're in partnership with TidyThink. You will see them all over our Instagram. They have just launched their planners for 25-26 academic year. I've just got mine. It is so cute. So I've ordered Citrus Grove and it's so beautiful. And there's even matching notebooks that I'm going to order. I'm definitely one of those teachers that has everything matching, from my pens to my notebooks to my planner. Like, I love all of that. So if you guys are into that too, you definitely need to head to TidyThink. So like I said, the planners are available now. You'll see it all over our Instagram. And we tag TidyThink in as well. So you can go direct to their Instagram and their website through us. So head to our Instagram now. Sorry, back to the episode. Hello and welcome back to the Teacher Experience podcast. I am Mrs. Dearman and today we are exploring a very important topic: how to create a sensory-friendly classroom. Our guest is Jordan, the creator behind Sensory Class on Instagram, which some of you may be familiar with. She is an expert in sensory-friendly education and shares her incredible tips, strategies and resources to help teachers build an environment where students can really thrive. Whether you're a teacher, SENCO, parents, or just passionate about supporting neurodivergent children, this episode is definitely for you. So welcome, Jordan.
Thank you for having me. It's nice to be on someone else's podcast.
We're so happy you're here. Thank you so much. We start every podcast with a what went well, an EBI. I don't know if it's something that you do in your school, and it's a secondary school thing. So I don't know if
it isn't, but I love it. I love it. What went well today? I started colourful semantics with my class, which is basically where the pronouns and the adjectives or the verbs have a different coloured symbol. It's to help students build sentences, basically. It's to help with expressive communication. And yeah, I showed my pupil, who is minimally speaking, a photo, and they were able to use these coloured symbols to create a 3-part sentence. And I didn't know that we could do that. So that was really exciting today.
That's so nice. I love it when this happens to me quite a lot in the classroom. I'd say not all the time though, where I have a plan in my head. And then sometimes it works so much better than I thought it would. And it's always so nice.
And sometimes the other way round too. Let's not fool ourselves. Sometimes, I mean, the lesson after that, then I had a lovely plan in my head. None of it went to plan and we had to call it a day. So, things are roundabouts.
We've all been there. And your EBI then, what's your even better?
It would be even better if 2 of my staff members weren't taken to cover. It has such a huge impact in my room. No adult is spare in my room, even if children are off. So it just has such a huge impact. Adults are our biggest and best resource. They're our most costly resource, but they're also our most invaluable resource. We could have all the most wonderful toys and resources and planning in the world, and without, especially in special education, without the adults to support us to facilitate those and use those safely and effectively, you might as well just have nothing in the cupboard at all.
I totally agree. I know in secondary school settings, due to obviously funding difficulties, we are struggling at the moment, and the schools just can't afford to fund TAs, and especially in those core subjects like maths and science, and English, they're so valuable. And I know a lot of cuts are being made, but even in the secondary setting, we completely agree with you. Thank you for sharing that. I'm going to dive straight in.
Yeah, do.
So what inspired you to focus on creating a sensory classroom, and how has it impacted the learning environment in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, gosh, I don't really have a choice in my room. My sensory learners are sensory, that they learn at a sensory level rather than an academic level. So they are doers, they are physical learners. I couldn't teach them something verbally or even just visually, actually, and expect it to be embedded. I've heard it being described as learning is like a forest. And whereas academic learners would maybe need to walk through the forest and make that connection once or twice, and then that pathway is established, that's how our neurological works in our brain. They do something once or twice, and then that pathway is physically connected to the other pathways, and it's learned behavior. However, if there's an impairment or a cognitive disability or a delay in some way, some kind of brain difference, then those connections often pass each other, miss each other, don't get fully connected or embedded. So we do a lot of repetition and a lot of physical sensory work. And also other learners, because of their cognitive disability, they might not understand the world like we understand it, but they understand it from a sensory base level. So I always try and ensure that I'm meeting all of my learners wherever they're at. And ultimately, we're all sensory beings. So I know that I've met all of my learners, even if they don't show it, if I'm doing things at a sensory level.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
No, it makes perfect sense. For our listeners that aren't familiar with your beautiful Instagram account, can you share with us kind of what your profile of your learners typically are in your classroom?
Yeah, so they're aged 4 to 11, but I suppose they're at the stage of age 0, so like 3 months to maybe 18 months. But their profiles are so spiky. So, for example, gross motor skills, they're incredibly good at. They're great climbers and runners, often, not all of them. And then some of them are have PMLD, so profound multiple learning disabilities. So they are in wheelchairs and peg fed. All of my children would be classed as minimally speaking or non-speaking. So they don't use words as their main form of communication, even if some of them can speak words. Instead, they would use things like gestures or reaching or guiding you or photos or symbols or objects. Or I think I once counted, I've got 10 pupils in my classroom and we use 16 forms of communication that isn't speaking. They're incredible at getting you to understand what they need and want. But yeah, that's kind of like my learners, and lots of them have an autistic profile. I also have some children with Down syndrome and PMLD, like I said before. So a huge mix. We don't say no to anybody.
Yeah, thank you. That's great, and it's just great for our listeners to get a bit of context to what your day-to-day looks like. So what, in your opinion then, is a sensory classroom? How would you define it, and why is it so beneficial?
So I've always, even when I was in a special ed school, so the whole school is special education, even then I was told that I had the sensory class, which I find really interesting. So there's always like, oh, they're the sensory class. And that was always mine. And that's what I love. That's what I'm good at. That's my passion, is to have all the most sensory class. It usually means that my carpet needs replacing more often, to be honest, than anyone else's. I had a record, actually. We moved into a brand new school, and nobody's beaten my record yet that my carpet lasted 3 weeks before it needed to be changed to vinyl. So yeah, I didn't get a certificate. I just got bad, dodgy looks, but I was quite secretly proud of that one. But yeah, I've always been told that I have the sensory class. So obviously in my mainstream school now, I clearly have the sensory class, but even in special education, I had the sensory class. And what does that mean? It means they flap and stim and jump and bounce and don't speak and don't look like, work doesn't look like in, how it does in a mainstream school. So I guess that's why I was always told that I had sensory learners or sensory class, which is where the Instagram name comes from. I'm very proud to have a sensory class and sensory classroom. But I feel like all mainstream teachers are now special education teachers, whether you want to or not. It's just how things are going. There's such a great need out there. And I could fill my classroom about 3 or 4 times over with the needs in my own mainstream school. And yeah, the reality is that all teachers are SEN teachers. So I feel like also teachers are coming to my page not having a sensory-based classroom or any training or knowledge on this at all, but having sensory learners in their classrooms and not knowing how to reach them or how best to adapt in order to meet their needs. Yeah, the most amazing teachers that are going out of their way to kind of seek out this stuff. And often our special education classes are so hidden. You're not allowed to visit because it might upset the children. There's coded locks on the doors. It's all so secretive. What do they do inside there? I think half of the population have an idea that it's some kind of institution, and there's lots of strict, rigid, stern, prison-like things that go on there, and the other half think we just watch YouTube and Cocomelon all the time, and it's kind of somewhere in between that, I have to say. Bit more on the Cocomelon side actually, but
No,
we're kind of halfway through that. But yeah, that's what a sensory classroom looks to me, and the benefits are huge. Even in a mainstream school, if children are having sensory breaks, movement breaks, really not just a little dance to Go Noodle or whatever you're doing, or a little squeeze of Play-Doh, which all has its place, it's great, but a really great multi-sensory experience, rich experience. Children remember that. I know when I look back on my own schooling, I remember the days where my whole body was involved, all my senses were involved. I took acting as my chosen degree, and that was for a reason. I loved my drama classes because my shoes were off and I could move and be free. And I really enjoyed that kind of sensory experience of it, and I remembered it. That's how I learned. So I feel like there is a place for sensory in all learning. It just takes a little bit of creativity and out the box
I
thinking,
do.
really.
I know, I totally agree. I think sensory learning benefits everyone, and I know a lot of people are talking about that now, which I think is
That's really
great.
exciting.
I think the words that people used to use was SEN, teaching benefits everyone, and now people are moving more towards sensory classrooms benefit everyone, which I totally agree
Absolutely.
with.
Autism practice is good practice. That is just end of. Yeah. I mean, I suppose you do teach science, did you say? Yeah, so science is incredibly sensory. You can't get away from the senses. The visual, the smell. Oh God, I used to love science. It's so sensory, isn't it? And it's really exciting in that way, and actually quite child-led in a lot of ways as well. That really excites me as a subject. That's what I'm looking for. But there are ways to turn all subjects into that kind of exploratory investigation kind of
Yeah,
path.
I feel quite lucky with the subject that I teach because it's very easy to make it sensory. And it's nice because in secondary school teaching, you're quite prescriptive on what you have to do in each lesson. And there's only a little kind of room or leeway to be creative. But with science, as long as we have capacity, you can do as much practicals as you want, which is what pupils
Yeah.
want to hear. And actually teaching practicals is so much more fun.
And I bet the behaviour's improved as well, because ultimately it's either because they don't understand or they don't learn in that way, or they're bored or they feel stifled or whatever. There's so many reasons why behaviour happens. If they're actively learning and exploring and leading and investigating, I feel like it makes sense that there would be less unsafe behaviours in those classes too.
Yes, and you are completely correct. And it is used. I've never met people that said, I'd rather learn from a textbook than a practical. I've never met people that said that. And it's used as a behavior management tool, practicals in science in a lot of schools, because if their behavior is good, then we can do more practicals. If their behavior is not, then you're limited just to the GCSE required practicals that schools legally have to teach.
Because it's about safety, isn't it? I presume that they have to be. Yeah.
But because of just having that conversation with them at the start of the year, their behavior is great, and it's so easy to teach, and you can build relationships so much more with pupils when you're doing practical learning.
Yeah, which is also so important, isn't it? Because if they feel like you like them or respect them on some level, which you can only do when you're in that collaborative relationship, then they're going to want to work harder for you and want to listen to you and respect you in that way. I mean, I've certainly felt both ways for teachers in my schooling.
I use the same line at the start of every year, and the line is when I'm doing our first practical, I'll say, I've said to my technician that I completely trust you guys. And I said, I told her you guys would behave and you'd respect all the equipment and you'd respect each other in the room. So please don't let me down, because that's really embarrassing for me.
Yeah.
And
it's your expectation. Your expectation is high, rather than your expectation being, now I know that you're going to struggle with this, and I know you're going to be tempted. I know you're setting up the expectation that that's what's going to happen, isn't it?
They love it because they're like, oh, Miss says she really trusts us. So they don't. Kids do want to please.
Yeah, assume competence is actually what we use a lot in our room, actually. So for all pupils, whatever your cognitive ability, assume competence, assume they can do it, and let them prove you wrong. And then ultimately, well, you know, what can you do? Maybe I had overestimated and we need to rein it in a bit. But yeah, what if they are capable of, you know, the colourful semantics, like I said at the beginning, or yeah, being able to be responsible in a science lesson. It's all that assuming competence, isn't it?
Yeah, and of course, safety is the most important thing. We use so many, especially in secondary school level, we use very dangerous.
Yeah.
We still use Bunsen burners all the time. I don't know if that's something you had at school.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah.
And pupils get their Bunsen burner license. I do feel lucky that I teach a subject where we can be practical.
Yeah, and trusting as well. So that level of danger as well. It is about that trust, isn't it? You know, let's assume that they can handle this responsibility, whatever that is, and yeah, let them prove you otherwise.
I'd love to know some of the key features or tools that you include in your sensory classroom, because I think some of our listeners would definitely be interested in
Yeah,
hearing some of your
absolutely.
ideas.
So there are two strands, really, I suppose, and there is a lot of overlap, but there are two main strands, and that is communication and sensory regulation. But because without either of those things, you know, we have nothing basically for all beings, whether you're in a sensory classroom or not. So yeah, there are two focuses really. So communication, finding a communication method that they can use and that they're choosing to use at different times of the day, because when they are well and feeling focused and feeling grounded and regulated, they might be able to use, I don't know, an iPad to communicate, or they might be able to write on a whiteboard, for example. But if they're dysregulated or poorly or tired, then they might not be able to do that. So it's about us ensuring that we have on offer and a modelling at all times all sorts of ways that they can communicate their needs, because ultimately without communication, how else are they going to get their wants and needs? Or they're going to hurt themselves and others and make unsafe choices, aren't they? So it's really important that they have that communication method. And like I said, I think I once counted there were 16 different communication methods used within my classroom in any given, 10-minute block. Really, we're constantly using all of them. You have to kind of model all of them and become an expert in all of them. And then, sensory regulation is equally as important. In fact, I would say I should have said sensory regulation before communication, actually, because children can only communicate if they're regulated. That has to come first. And for all of us, we're constantly regulating ourselves all the time. So I'm sure on your science stalls, you're seeing some more fidgety wigglers and some paper rollers or some doodlers. And all of that is them just regulating themselves. Some of it might be stimming, so they're kind of self-stimulating themselves because they're struggling to sit down. Some of it might be that they're doing it to try and focus on you. You know, some of it might be distraction, some of it might be focus. That depends on how their brain works. So you'll be seeing it in all of your classes, those kind of fidgety kind of behaviors, children that need more physical stimulation than others, and it's very, very obvious in my room. You can't ignore it in my room.
I actually think stimming is actually a word that's only recently starting to come into mainstream education.
Okay.
In my opinion, into mainstream schools. It's obviously something that I'm aware of because I'm assistant Senko, and it's just as soon as I became a teacher, it was an area of interest for me. But I think the word stimming is coming in.
Okay.
And the teachers, my friends that are teachers, the only ones that I know that are aware of that term are the ones that have actually seeked it out.
Interesting. So for those that are listening that don't know what it is just simply self-stimulating behavior. So it happens right from when we're babies, that we do something and it self-confirms who we are, that we are ourselves and we are our being. I mean, it starts from involuntary things like burping, farting, yawning, all those blinking, all those things that we're getting feedback from our body from right in those early stages that's completely subconscious. We're getting feedback of who we are. Well, if you're autistic or blind or whatever, have those kind of impairments in that way, that those barriers to feeling that's confirmation of self, then you're gonna need to do even more of it, and it kind of spirals in that way. So those that aren't seeing the outside world or getting that confirmation from the outside world are kind of internally stimming and finding that confirmation. So that's where the stimming comes from. They're self-stimulating because they're not getting that confirmation of themselves from outward sources. So somebody autistic might not be aware or not have processed in enough time, and they haven't received that information. Or somebody that's blind or deaf, for example, there'll be barriers there to receiving that information. So they become reliant on being their own regulators and their own source of sense of self. And when we're feeling a little bit unsure and anxious, tired or distracted, we kind of need to stimulate ourselves. So what do? We might rock our pen, we might doodle, we might rock on our seat. Some just need it more than others. Those, for example, with a sensory regulation kind of need would then need to do it even more because they've kind of got a deficit, really.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think even now it is common for pupils to be clicking their pens and things like that, and teachers to ask them to stop doing it. I think that sort of thing does still happen, and that's just purely because we don't have much training on special educational needs when we become teachers.
None. I got none.
Yeah.
So I did my training as a primary school teacher, and I think we spoke about dyslexia, and that really, really was it. I started my first day at special education classroom, and I was literally dragged through the first year by my teaching assistants. I didn't have a clue. We're not taught anything. I hope it's changed these days. That was 15 years ago. I hope it's different now, but I don't know that it is.
I trained 5 years ago, and very similar to you, kind of touched on dyslexia, autism, ADHD, but very surface, just kind of what it is. No,
Right. And to think that every single classroom in the country has got children with these things, and I know the National Autistic Society still says 1 in 100 are autistic. There are lots of research to say it is significantly more, because there's research coming out about how it looks in females in comparison to boys, and it looks very different. I've read papers recently that have come out that say it's much more like 1 in 4. So yeah, the research will come out in the next 10 years that will change that number 1 in 100, because I don't know, every class has about 30 pupils in it. I would say you've at least got one autistic in your class, whether you know it or not, whether they know it or not. They might be really masking up to the high heavens, but I guarantee you have one.
You're right in what you said earlier. Every teacher is a SEN teacher. Society has got so good at having the conversation around things like dyslexia, autism, ADHD. It's becoming more of a thing accepted in society to talk about. Even when I was at school, which wasn't that long ago, I don't remember it ever being a conversation. I was undiagnosed with dyslexia until I was 21.
Right.
When I went to university and failed a statistics
exam. It's really common.
And that wasn't that long ago. So I'm 28 now, and I was 21 when I got diagnosed. And that was the start of the conversation.
Yeah, it's really common, especially in females. I don't know why, but in the 60s, 70s, 80s, when lots of this research was being done, it was all done on boys. And the fact is neurodiversity looks very different in females. There's lots of things with women's health that is behind the times. I don't need to tell you that, I'm sure. But neurodiversity is one as well. And I think lots of research is being done now to prove that it just looks different. So even the autism test still, there are questions in it that are incredibly misleading if you're a female. For example, one of them is, do you have obsessions over things, e.g. trains? Now, a female autist would read that and think, no, I don't. But it might be that, I don't know, they really love knitting or really love going on holiday or makeup, whatever, and they wouldn't have that too, because they've given the example trains, and these are also very literal thinkers. It seems very unfair to give an example. But it's so wrong, isn't it? Whereas I think with social media now and all this research coming out and more females being in science and research, that, we're finally catching up.
Absolutely. The reason why girls and women have been excluded from a lot of the research into ADHD and autism is because the menstrual cycle affects the results, apparently. So this is the big theory at the moment. So a lot of the questions, like you said, around autistic and ADHD profiles will be questions around emotions and how they feel. So the reason why women couldn't be included is because women feel very differently depending on which hormone, either estrogen, progesterone, for example, is highest in their body at that time. So apparently that's why women were excluded originally. However, obviously that doesn't help society's understanding of those two profiles, because then you can't understand how women, and obviously they do experience it differently. So it is a really interesting theory as to why women have been excluded. So you share a lot of your ideas on Instagram, on social media. How has this helped you grow as a practitioner, as a teacher? And what kind of feedback are you getting from your followers?
It's helped me grow massively. I have close contact now with so many experts in the field. It's incredible. So yeah, I basically utilize my podcast as, CPD, to be honest. Like, it is incredible being able to talk to the absolute pioneers of these programs and systems and resources to help teachers and parents. Everyone I speak to, I'm just almost like writing notes. Like, I just want to absorb all of your knowledge. Yeah, it's changed my practice massively this year. So I only started my account in December, so last December. So it's just over a year ago. And this year, yeah, my practice has changed so much. It's so much more affirming. I thought I was affirming anyway, but it's so much more affirming. I'm so much more child-led. I've heard about practice I didn't even know existed that filled gaps that I knew I had. Yeah, it's just been really, really exciting. Social media is amazing when utilised in this way, isn't it? It has a lot of its faults, but my goodness, it is an amazing social way of getting the information from experts in your pocket at all times, especially nowadays when it's so difficult to get professional support and advice. There are such long waiting lists if you get it at all. So having it in your pocket to able to access is just incredible. I feel so lucky, and I hope that my followers feel the same as well. But yeah, all I'm doing is regurgitating my own research, to be honest, over the years and my own experience, and putting it into terms that are digestible. I feel like social media lends itself to that as well. You get 90 seconds to explain how the brain works, and you have to make it digestible. You have to make it fun and snappy. And also, I really try and make it really positive. The main reason why I started my account actually is I was trying to find an account that spoke about the job in a really positive way, that didn't mock the children, that didn't glamorize bites and bruises, and didn't use the child's trauma and bad experiences to kind of, look how tough I am, look how hard the job is. And that's all I could find, and it was absolutely heartbreaking because it's not my reality at all.
Yeah.
And I thought, this is going to scare people away from the job. It's going to really worry parents. It looked like their children weren't loved or understood at all. And I'm sure that's not the case. I'm sure that's just what I unfortunately found, when I was looking. So I wanted to do better, and I only speak on my children in the highest regard. I have so much respect for them because that's true, and I adore my job, and I know that comes across, and I think that it shifts perspective, and I think that's why people maybe in the last year have found my account so endearing, is because they've never heard children so as complex as in my class spoken about in this way, with so much respect and dignity and intrigue and curiosity. It's never blame or shame, and I think that's the difference there.
Yeah, I think probably the word that came to mind when I first came across your account a while ago was it just seemed really honest and genuine.
That's
and
nice
so
to hear.
warm. And it's so lovely. If anyone hasn't been to your Instagram, we'll tag you at the bottom of the episode so they can go check you out.
I'm incredibly proud of it. I'm incredibly proud of the community we've built. It's such a positive, loving space, and it feels like such a safe bubble. And every so once in a while, I get this awful news story that bursts the bubble, but it's a really lovely place to retreat to, because I just know that I can say and do anything, and they get it. They love these kids too. They're passionate about them too. And yeah, it just feels really safe. It's how I feel like the world should be. So yeah, I'd like to live in my little bubble.
So if you've got anyone listening that is thinking, I really want to create more of a sensory friendly space in my classroom, what advice would you give to teachers and how they could achieve this?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose think about communication and think about movement. and just make reasonable adjustments. I'm not asking you to change your whole timetable, your whole curriculum, or affect the whole class just because you have one pupil in a class. That's not what I'm saying. I know that's not realistic. I know it's not. You've got so much to do. But it's about reasonable adjustment. So if your pupil is clearly struggling to wear their shoes, but they're still focusing on their work, just step back before you say it's school rules, safety, fire drill, all of that kind of thing, which I've heard lots of times before. Just step back, take a breather, and just say, in this moment, is this a reasonable adjustment that I can make right now? Sometimes the answer will be yes, sometimes the answer will be no. There is no right or wrong, but it is about your room, that time, that pupil, and making those reasonable adjustments. So the pen clicking, great example. For some people, that is a reasonable adjustment to make. For other people, it's incredibly distracting for them. They're clearly not concentrating. So maybe find them something else. So it's about, experimenting, being curious. There's obviously a reason behind that behavior. So I always, God, I'll die on this hill. Behavior is communication. So when you're seeing a behavior, whatever it is, see it as communication. Be curious about that behavior. And if it's unsafe or inappropriate, don't stick with it. But maybe experiment with alternatives. Maybe think, how else could they meet that need that is appropriate or not distracting for the room? Or what is a reasonable adjustment I can make for the benefit of the pupil, not to the benefit of the class, not because it's distracting the class or distracting me, but what is beneficial for this pupil in particular? Sometimes that looks like exclusion, I have to say, if it's for the pupil's benefit. Sometimes some pupils cannot cope in a busy, loud, cluttered, well-lit environment, echoey environment. They can't. And if it's for the pupil's benefit to work in a cornered off area that feels safe to them, that's not cluttered, that is absolutely okay. Inclusion doesn't mean including all of the time. So I'd say just have a think about, if it's for the pupil's benefit, make that reasonable adjustment and know that that's okay. Don't worry about the word exclusion and inclusion. Don't worry, they're big words and they get thrown around a lot, but ultimately you are including your pupil if they're able to focus and learn, even if that looks like on the outside exclusion. It's a reasonable adjustment to make because it benefits that pupil.
I understand. And one example, so the clicking pen is a great one in secondary school. The other one is top buttons done up. So by that I mean the button by your tie.
I couldn't.
Yeah. So I know schools are struggling with this. There's really strong opinions on it, actually, to be honest. A lot of teachers think that, they should have their top button done up.
Mm-hmm.
Because then they are kind of included with everyone else. The rules are the same for everyone. And there's obviously people like me who have explored this area a lot, and it's my job as assistant SENCO to make reasonable adjustments for pupils.
Yeah.
So
it's the difference between equality and equity, right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Equality is we're all the same, but the fact is we're not all the same. I've read in this book, actually, that I'm going to read from a bit later. I couldn't find it. I wanted to read the paragraph. I couldn't find this paragraph, but it explained that some people's skin is as sensitive as an eyeball. Now, just process that for a second. Can you imagine having labels and seams touching your eyeball and still having to concentrate on your work? Absolutely not. Can you imagine having your head shaved, but it being shaved as sensitive as an eyeball? Let's just assume, we don't know that these children don't have skin as sensitive as an eyeball. We will never know that. So let's assume, what if they do?
Yeah.
If we could measure that, if we could measure skin sensitivity and it came up with that data, would we really be pushing top buttons? Would we really be pushing uniform at all? Would we have seamless compression vests? I would.
Yeah.
So I think let's assume that there's obviously a reason. Like, I know for me at high school, I really struggle with that. I can't wear necklaces or anything. I really struggle with things that are here. So I had it undone, but I just had my tie up to the same point. And that was a reasonable adjustment that I chose to make myself. But yeah, their bodies aren't our bodies. And just because we're okay with it doesn't mean that they are. And some teachers say, well, I'm not okay with it either, but I have to get on with it. And I think, yeah, but masking is really detrimental to mental health. And we didn't know that 10, 20 years ago. We know that now. And if we're asking pupils to mask, they're not going to be concentrating on learning in your lesson. What are we here for? Are we here for compliance and control? Or are we here to teach these kids science?
Yeah.
And some teachers won't want to be teaching their kids science. Some teachers are there for compliance and control, and then they need to be working in a prison, not an education setting. We're educators. We need to be focusing on education, and if the children can focus and relax in your lesson, they're gonna learn more. You're gonna get better. You're gonna get better results. I think lots of teachers are really scared to loosen that control and compliance aspect because they're really scared about what that might look like and what that might mean for their results. But ultimately, I promise you, if your children are relaxed in your lessons, they will be learning.
I saw an image on Instagram the other day. It showed a picture of a secondary school. Must have been like probably 60 years ago, or the kids were in rows and they all looked exactly the same. They all wore exactly the same. And there was a picture of a classroom from now secondary school, mainstream education, from a school that had like 2,000 kids, and it was exactly the same. Desks in a row, kids were dressed exactly the same, and they looked exactly the same. And I just think how much has changed in society, in life, in our understanding of the brain, of humans, of human interaction. I just think how is the education system still this way? In mainstream.
Yeah, and it comes down to what adults do we want to raise as well. So do we want to raise compliant and controlled adults that, yes, sir, I won't question anything. I'm not going to raise safeguarding concerns. I'm not going to whistle blow. I'm not going to stick up for my friend who's getting spoken at weirdly by this stranger. I'm not going to call out my friends when they talk inappropriately about women. I'm not going to call out my friend who says a racist slur. Are we really wanting those kind of adults in our society? I don't. I want confident and self-assured adults in our society that are willing to call people out when things aren't right, that are willing to advocate for their bodies and consent to things and not consent to things. That's what I want in society. So it starts at school, doesn't it? It starts really young.
Absolutely. And I think obviously mental health within teenagers is so poor.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I just think this is such an area that we could really look at in the UK and
absolutely. Yeah, and you can start small. We're not going to fix the UK. We're not going to do that with just us yet. It's on the to-do list, but we can make the class in our class better. That is something we can control, because otherwise, if you look at the big picture, it feels completely huge and unattainable and then really scary. But we can start small. We might be able to change it for 1 pupil, 2 pupils. For maybe. That's the hope.
So we finish every episode on a research bite. So Jordan, can you share your research bite this week?
Yeah, kind of not research, kind of a poem actually. So this book is called Building Bridges Through the Sensory Integration, and it takes you through a guide of, if your child is doing this, then this might be why, and this is what you need to do about it, all the way through. It's basically what all people want to have hold of, actually. So it's called Building Bridges Through the Sensory Integration, and it's written by occupational therapists. But there's a lovely poem at the beginning of it, and it's called Build Me a Bridge. And I'd quite like to read that, if that's okay. The idea is that lots of these neurotypical pupils look unreachable or lost. That's often how they're described in reports, is they're in their own world. I'm sure everyone can think of a pupil that they would describe in that way. And what the system at the moment is trying to do is build a bridge, but to pull that person out of their world and into our world, which seems reasonable. But actually, that's asking for them to do all the things that we're asking them to do, is to mask and hold it all in. Whereas actually, how beautiful would it be if we built a bridge and we crossed the bridge, we learned their ways and their whys and their hows, and we adapted to suit them and how they learn and how their brain works. So yeah, that's what I'd like to finish with today, if that's okay.
Thank you so much.
So, build me a bridge. I have known that you and I have never been quite the same, and I used to look up at the stars at night and wonder which one was from where I came, because you seem to be part of another world, and I will never know what it's made of unless you build me a bridge, build me a bridge, build me a bridge out of love. I long for the day that you smile at me, just because you realise that there's a decent and intelligent person buried deep in my kaleidoscope eyes. For I have seen the way that people look at me, though I have done nothing wrong. Build me a bridge, and please don't take too long. Living on the edge of fear, voices echo like thunder in my ear. See me hiding every day, I'm just waiting for the fear to lift away. I want so much to be part of your world. I want so much to break through. And all I need is to have a bridge built from me to you. And I will be together with you forever, and nothing can keep us apart. If you build me a bridge, a tiny little bridge from my soul deep down into your heart.
That was so wonderful. And thank you so much. That was such a perfect way to end the episode. Can you please tell our listeners where they can find you?
Absolutely. I am at Sensory Class on all social media platforms. And then my website is sensoryclassroom.org.